Saludos y bienvenidos a nuestro segundo programa Forward Together, Adelante Juntos.
Welcome to the second episode of Forward Together, Adelante Juntos.
Desde nuestro último episodio, nuestro movimiento, la campaña de la gente pobre, un llamado nacional a la renovación moral, ha estado trabajando arduamente, organizando por todo el país, construyendo este movimiento de fusión.
Since our last episode, the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, has been hard at work organizing across the country and building a fusion movement.
En el estado de Nueva York, algunos de nuestros líderes, y yo tuve el honor de estar ahí, nos unimos a la coalición PUSH y a la coalición de justicia transformadora en Selma, Alabama, para el 57 aniversario del cruce del puente Amos Putus, lo que se conoce como el Domingo Sangriento. En este evento estuvo también la vicepresidenta Kamala Harris.
We joined the Rainbow Push Coalition, the Transformative Justice Coalition, and Vice President Kamala Harris in Selma, Alabama, for the 57th anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery marches, and what is now known as Bloody Sunday, the historic march in 1965 where over 600 voting rights marchers were beaten and tear-gassed on the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
Aquí en Nueva York también estuvimos presentes en la lucha por los fondos para las universidades de CUNY and SUNY.
We stood up to fight for full funding for CUNY and SUNY in the state budget.
Y también, junto al Level Religious Coalition del Estado de Nueva York, presentamos un reporte basado en la Comisión de la Verdad por el Derecho a la Salud y la Tercera Reconstrucción que ellos celebraron.
And alongside the Labor Religion Coalition of New York State, we released a multimedia report from their Truth Commission last month, The Right to Health and the Third Reconstruction.
En el Frente Nacional, también iniciamos la primera etapa de nuestra asamblea masiva y de trabajadores pobres y de bajos ingresos y la marcha moral que se realizará en junio 18.
The tour launched in Cleveland and is stopping in Raleigh, Madison, Washington, D.C., West Virginia, New York City, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, and Memphis to lift up the priorities and demands of poor and low-wealth people across the country.
Todo esto para elevar las prioridades y demandas de las personas pobres y de bajos ingresos en todo el país. Y el 18 de junio 2022, les pedimos que se unan a nosotros en Washington, D.C. para esta gran asamblea de los trabajadores pobres y de bajos ingresos y la marcha moral a Washington, D.C. y a las urnas.
And on June 18th, we're asking you to join us in Washington, D.C. for the Mass Poor People's and Low-Wage Workers Assembly and Moral March on Washington and to the polls.
Bien, pues hoy le vamos a traer las voces e historias de los líderes de la campaña aquí en Nueva York y en otros estados que nos hablarán de lo que está pasando en sus comunidades.
Today, we're going to bring you the voices and stories of campaign leaders from across the country.
En nuestro primer episodio le hicimos una introducción a lo que es la campaña de la gente pobre, pero hoy vamos a profundizar más sobre quiénes somos y cuál es nuestro objetivo.
Last episode, we introduced you to the Poor People's Campaign, but today, we're going to deepen our understanding of who we are.
También no querrás perderte una magnífica interpretación musical que tendremos.
You're also going to want to stick around for an incredible musical performance.
Hoy vamos a comenzar en español y continuaremos más adelante en inglés. Gracias por acompañarnos.
We'll start today in Spanish, and we'll continue later in English. Thanks for joining us.
Bueno, ahora tenemos una entrevista muy especial con dos personas muy especiales. Es la reverenda Dorlimar Lebrón, que es la pastora de la primera iglesia metodista hispana aquí en el barrio, la iglesia que también se conoce como la iglesia del pueblo. Y Natalia Fajardo, que es de Wisconsin, una de nuestras líderes en Wisconsin. Bienvenidas.
Muchas gracias, Arelis.
Hola, hola.
¿Cómo están?
Aquí.
Bien, vamos a tener esta conversación así un poco íntima entre nosotras y para que las personas nos conozcan. Y la primera pregunta es esta, precisamente. Dinos un poco de ustedes y qué la trajo a este trabajo. Dorlimar, podemos empezar contigo.
Sí, bueno, es un placer estar aquí con ustedes, ser parte de este equipo, de este movimiento de los pobres, de los pueblos pobres. Yo he sido pastora aquí en el barrio desde 2018 y, y conozco a Arelis desde mucho tiempo. Y yo sé que ella siempre es bien activa, siempre tiene diferentes videos y fotos que ella postea en las redes sociales. Y nos reconectamos como 6 meses atrás y participé en el primer evento, en uno de los eventos de la campaña de los pobres en Washington, D.C. Y desde ese momento yo me recomprometí con ese proyecto, me comprometí con, con las ideas, los valores de ese proyecto y la agencia y la necesidad de tener esos proyectos, no solamente para cambios de legislaciones y cambios en los niveles del gobierno, sino también para asumir esos principios, esos valores como nosotros mismos, como seres humanos y como comunidad. Y como nosotros como comunidad también podemos tomar esos principios, esos valores para cambiar a nuestro mundo, cambiar a nuestras comunidades, a nuestros barrios. Así que yo creo que por eso fue que yo me conecté con este proyecto y me siento tan comprometida con la visión de la campaña.
Gracias, Dorly. Um, y Natalia, dinos un poco sobre ti. Estás en Wisconsin, ¿de dónde eres originalmente?
Sí, sí. Bueno, aquí muy encantada de estar con ustedes dos y recibiendo un poco de calor humano en este lugar que siempre hace mucho frío, no siempre, en julio no, pero ahorita todavía hace bastante frío. Soy Natalia, soy de Colombia, de Bogotá, así que pues siempre he crecido en partes no muy calientes, pero igual, aquí es otro nivel. Vivo en Wisconsin hace 3 años y soy parte de, primero, Vecinos Unidos, que es un grupo también a nivel de barrio, que tenemos un jardín comunitario y nos organizamos para defender nuestros derechos y para luchar por una vida con dignidad para todas las personas de nuestro vecindario. Pero también soy parte de la campaña de la gente pobre. Soy del comité coordinador acá en Wisconsin y un poco similar a la reverenda Dorlimar. Yo creo que esa importancia, por un lado, de tener trabajo a nivel barrial, a nivel municipal y también más amplio nacional e internacional, que creo que es parte del valor que Arelis hace en su trabajo de enlazarnos con comunidades en Latinoamérica. Pero también el desarrollo de liderazgo, ¿no? Que cada uno de nosotros tenemos un papel que jugar en crear un mundo donde en verdad haya justicia para todas las personas y que eso se logra a través de la unión de la gente pobre y desposeída.
Yeah. Dorlimar, estamos nosotros ahora mismo aquí en el barrio, también a unas cuadras de tu congregación. Y dinos un poco de la historia de esa congregación, que mucha gente quizás todavía no hacen la conexión. Y cómo ves la importancia, y si tú ves esos valores de la campaña y cómo van tu participación en la campaña, cómo va a ayudarte, cómo va a realzar el trabajo también en la comunidad y en la congregación.
Sí, bueno, mi iglesia es una iglesia que en mayo de 2022, este mayo, vamos a cumplir 100 años en la comunidad aquí en el barrio. Fue una iglesia fundada por inmigrantes de Puerto Rico en el 1922 y ha sido una congregación que ha tenido una historia complicada, como todos nosotros, y en el 1969 un grupo político, la contraparte puertorriqueña de los Black Panthers, que se llamaban los Young Lords, se ocuparon del edificio para demandar justicia para su comunidad, para apoyar a su comunidad, ofreciendo desayunos para los niños, ofreciendo diferentes programas culturales, enseñándole a su comunidad de su historia. Y entonces desde ese momento nombraron esta iglesia la Iglesia del Pueblo. Y desde que yo he llegado en el 2018, mi visión siempre ha sido ¿cómo es que podemos vivir y encarnar esta idea de ser la iglesia del pueblo? Una iglesia abierta para todos, una iglesia que sirve a su comunidad, una iglesia que tiene en mente la necesidad de su comunidad, como parte íntegra, no solamente de su conciencia, pero sino también de su fe. Porque para mí mi historia viene de una historia de la teología de liberación, que es fundamental como yo entiendo la historia de Jesús, la historia de Dios como un Dios de los oprimidos. Entonces, el proyecto de la campaña de los pobres para mí es muy importante porque siempre pone en el centro de la historia los más necesitados. Siempre pone en el centro de la historia los más los más que necesitan la más atención, los que necesitan justicia, los que necesitan, y esos que necesitan justicia y liberación somos nosotros. Así que para nosotros poder usar estos principios, usar esos valores, construir comunidades de fe, comunidades con gente que son gente de conciencia, poder construir comunidades así son lo que transforman nuestros barrios, son lo que transforman nuestras familias. Cuando empezamos a pensar que sí hay poder cuando estamos unidos, que sí hay poder en el pueblo popular, y sí, cuando nos apoyamos, cuando estamos juntos, podemos vencer cualquier obstáculo. Eso para mí no es solamente el Evangelio, sino también es la visión y la misión de esta campaña. Y por eso que para mí, yo creo que para mí es algo bien fundamental tener esto como algo, esta campaña como algo central del desarrollo de líderes en la iglesia, igual que el desarrollo de líderes en nuestras comunidades. Porque ahí yo creo que se ve la transformación, no solamente, como hemos dicho ya, en los niveles de gobierno, sino que en todos los niveles de nuestra sociedad.
Bien, me identifico muchísimo con eso que dices, porque la verdad que cuando yo oí al reverendo Barber, yo dije, ok, esto es real. Y mi experiencia, ya saben que vengo de la República Dominicana, pero antes de eso yo estuve en Brasil y ahí yo estudié Teología de la Liberación. Esa opción preferencial por los pobres es central al ministerio de Jesús y es central al ministerio y al llamado de esta campaña. Y yo sé que, Natalia, ¿qué tú nos puedes decir de eso? Esos, los pilares de la campaña. ¿Cuáles son? Y si te llaman, ¿cómo te hablan a ti de manera personal?
Sí, no, ha sido una experiencia muy linda escucharles y la verdad, escuchando a la reverenda, escuchando a Arelis hablar, casi que fortalece y reanima la razón de por qué estoy en la campaña y el hecho de que estamos haciendo espacios directamente en español de nuestras comunidades para profesar este amor al prójimo y la necesidad de un cambio social fuerte. Creo que me reivindica en la razón por la cual somos parte de la campaña. A nivel personal me atrae un ángulo diferente en el sentido de que yo no practico ninguna religión. Sin embargo, para nosotros la campaña es algo muy importante porque sabemos que la religión, querámoslo o no, es política. Y si nosotros decidimos hacerla a un lado y decir, yo no soy religiosa, no es para mí, sabemos que las personas que están en el poder y que se benefician de la manera como el poder funciona hoy, van a usar la religión como herramienta a su favor. Por lo tanto, creo que el trabajo que ustedes hacen es primordial. Por ese motivo también soy parte de la Iglesia del Pueblo, la virtual, que Arelis organiza los domingos y otras personas. Y la campaña, esta cuestión de la religión y la narrativa moral es uno de los pilares importantes de la campaña, ¿verdad? El hecho de que no podemos justificar lo injustificable a través de los textos sagrados, sino que la interpretación nos muestra que no solo Jesús, pero que las religiones principales y que en realidad lo que busca el ser humano es apoyarse el uno al otro y que lo que está sucediendo de tanta pobreza en medio de tanta riqueza no puede justificarse y no es como el mundo debería funcionar. Entonces, esta cuestión de buscar cambiar la narrativa religiosa es uno de los pilares. Alrededor también del pilar de la devastación ecológica. Entonces, la campaña lo que busca es mostrar la base sobre la cual nuestra sociedad, que está basada en la inequidad, en la opresión, se basa, y son pilares interconectados. Aunque los mencionemos uno a otro, nos daremos cuenta de que entre ellos están entrelazados. Entonces, como mencionaba, el daño ecológico, la devastación ecológica, pues es la manera en que en el sistema en el que vivimos es desechable, ¿no? El aire, el agua, y que aparte hay unas personas privilegiadas que sí tienen acceso a agua pura, aire limpio, y hay otras que no. También está la militarización, y sabemos muy bien qué tan atado está la situación que tenemos en el país. Sabemos que cuando se trata de la guerra, como vemos ahora en este momento, no hay discusión de presupuesto, ¿verdad? Y se giran cheques en blanco sin cuestionar. Y cuando se trata de nuestras escuelas y nuestros hospitales, tenemos que balancear el presupuesto, ¿no? Entonces, sabemos que el costo militar y la militarización de la sociedad es una razón principal por la cual estamos aquí hoy. Y también pues está el racismo sistémico, ¿no? Que sabemos que el hecho de que personas de color, personas negras, personas latinas, nativos indígenas y otros, pues en este país la tenemos más difícil. Sabemos que viene de algo por diseño, de que el sistema en el que vivimos, económico, social y político, se beneficia de que haya esa diferenciación. Y que todo eso está muy atado a la pobreza sistémica de nuevo, de que el hecho de que después de una pandemia nos encontremos buscando de qué sobrevivir, que tengamos que escoger entre salud y educación o salud y comida, ¿no? Lo que deberíamos tener como seres humanos en el país más rico del mundo, pues mientras a la vez han habido unos pocos que se han multiplicado su riqueza en forma exponencial, pues muestra el problema tan grave que tenemos y que cada vez se está empeorando más. Esa diferencia entre ricos y pobres está creciendo profundamente y sabemos de nuevo que eso es por diseño, ¿no? Entonces la campaña lo que hace es unir a las personas que estamos luchando en diferentes frentes, que tenemos situaciones específicas, pero que al final de cuentas nos une el ser desposeídos y desposeídas, y entender que al unirnos pues podemos, y jalar hacia un mismo lado, podemos lograr cambios significativos.
Gracias. Dorlimán, inclusive nosotros como cristianos, ¿verdad? Sabemos que tenemos que hacer mucha mea culpa por muchas de las cosas que han hecho nuestras iglesias. Y también estás no solamente en tu iglesia local, sino llevando este mensaje y tratando de que también tu iglesia a nivel nacional o a nivel de denominación se envuelva en la campaña, ¿no? ¿Puedes decir cuál es tu deseo para las denominaciones?
Sí, nosotros ahora mismo estamos organizando, yo y varios líderes de la iglesia metodista aquí en la área de Nueva York, estamos tratando de organizar nuestra conferencia, nuestra área, para llenar una guagua o dos guaguas para ir y participar en la marcha de junio en Washington, D.C. Pero la idea sería cómo podemos seguir conectando todos estos proyectos, porque la realidad es que no tenemos que estar reconstruyendo diferentes proyectos nuevos. Todo el mundo, hay tantos proyectos ya que iglesias participan, organizan, otros grupos, y para mí, yo lo que quiero, mi meta sería tratar de unir todos estos diferentes movimientos a que se unan a esta campaña, porque la verdad que esta campaña nos cubre a todos y tenemos que estar unidos en este proyecto. Y algo que nosotros hemos hecho es que ya hemos tenido por lo menos un evento donde pudimos compartir más información sobre la campaña durante durante el mes de Black History Month, nosotros tuvimos como que un evento donde conectamos la historia de Martin Luther King y del Poor People's Campaign de los 60 y lo conectamos con el proyecto que está todavía hoy vivo. Para empezar a hablar, para empezar a invitar al pueblo a participar en esta campaña. Y algo muy único, yo creo, por lo menos del pueblo de nosotros aquí en Nueva York específicamente, es que muchos de nosotros venimos de diferentes países, que nosotros mismos participando en esta campaña, la hacemos una campaña internacional, porque cada uno de nosotros traemos nuestros propios países, traemos nuestras propias raíces de América Latina, y para nosotros yo creo que también es sumamente importante participar en este proyecto y esta campaña aquí en los Estados Unidos, pero también tener en mente la solidaridad internacional que es necesaria porque las mismas pólizas que nos afectan a nosotros afectan a países por todo el mundo. A países como Cuba, a países como Puerto Rico, a países como Haití, y puedo seguir, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, todos nuestros países, muchas de las razones de las cuales nosotros hemos inmigrado y estamos en los Estados Unidos son por las pólizas de este país. Así que para mí esta campaña es una campaña doméstica, pero igual es una campaña que nos empuja y nos enseña que la solidaridad internacional es sumamente importante y también parte íntriga de este proyecto.
Definitivamente, por eso estamos construyendo esa solidaridad nosotros día a día en la iglesia del pueblo. Ya no tenemos que ir, pero no sin antes recordar junio 18 y la razón por la que tenemos hoy aquí a Natalia es porque están en la movilización de su región para junio 18. Así que rapidito, Natalia, solamente unas palabras. ¿Por qué vamos para Washington en junio 18?
Estamos recorriendo el país entero. En Wisconsin llegamos el lunes con los directores de la campaña, con las personas que somos parte, con las voces de los pobres y desposeídos, para animar a todas las personas a participar, a que vayamos todos para Washington, D.C. el 18 de junio, a unirnos en una sola voz, a decirle al Congreso no más. Tenemos que escuchar directamente las voces de nosotros y a unirnos como pobres y desposeídos de varios lugares.
Me encanta tu perro. Bueno, pues gracias. Él también va para Washington y nosotros vamos a vernos en Washington, D.C. y nos vemos también en las calles en la movilización. Gracias, mis hermanas, por haber estado con nosotros.
Gracias a ti, Arelis.
We have a crisis. A lot of children are going to their bed hungry. Our brothers and sisters are sleeping on the streets.
Va a deportarme y separarme de mis hijos.
I can be deported and separated from my children.
The reason that we deal with poverty is because of a failure to invest in the things that all people need to live decent lives.
Up over my head, I hear music in the air. Up over my head, I hear music in the air. Up over my head, I hear music in the air. And I really do believe, yes, I really do believe change is coming out there. Up over my head, I see justice in the air. Up over my head, I see justice in the air. Up over my head, I see justice in the air. And I really do believe, yes, I really do believe change is coming out there. Up over my head, I see hope is in the air. Up over my head, I see hope is in the air. Up over my head, I see hope is in the air. And I really do believe, yes, I really do believe change is coming out there. Up over my head, I see changes in the air. Up over my head, I see changes in the air. Up over my head, I see changes in the air. And I really do believe, yes, I really do believe change is coming out there. Up over my head, I see love all around us. Up over my head, I see peace everywhere. Up over my head, I see sheer determination. Up over my head, I see joy. I see justice up over our heads. I see healing. I see hope up over our heads. I see power to the people over my head. Up over my head.
Wow, thank you so much for that powerful performance. And now we're joined in studio by Braden Welsh from the New York City Poor People's Campaign Repairs of the Breach. Braden, thanks for being here.
Of course, thank you for having me.
And we're joined remotely as well from the Hudson Valley, Gemma Kalinda, Hudson Valley organizer from Hand in Hand. Thank you for being here, Gemma.
Welcome, thank you for having me.
And all the way from Chicago, from the Illinois Poor People's Campaign, we have Sheila Garland Olaniran. Thank you, Sheila, for being here.
Thanks, Jake. Great to be here.
So I guess we'll just first start with a broad question for everyone. And that question is, what brought you into this work? You know, so Braden, we can maybe just start with you, give a little bit of background of what brought you into the Poor People's Campaign.
Yeah, that is a broad question, but it's a great one. I personally, I think kind of from an earlier age, I lived in North Carolina throughout high school, and there's a lot of natural disasters, a lot of hurricanes, and they, of course, with the climate crisis, are increasing in intensity. Furthermore, the application of services towards affected people is very much applied towards those wealthier neighborhoods in a very stark contrast. And so in 2018, there's a hurricane called Hurricane Florence, and some of the government housing programs were actually without power for weeks, while there were individuals who were getting, all across the rest of the city or the town, were getting stuff back on within hours or even days. That being said, also in the summer of 2020, I think a lot of people, especially young people, were called to the movement with the state murder of George Floyd. I was down organizing in Raleigh, just grassroots, with a lot of amazing people. And that's why I met the Poor People's Campaign. We saw, it's kind of a funny joke, we saw some people in the streets and they were not deterred by the militarized police presence, and they should have to be some representatives from the Poor People, or they were involved with the Poor People's Campaign. I don't think they were in their capacity at that time, so let me not put that. And that's how I got involved, and then when I moved to the city, I just stayed in contact.
That's amazing, and we'll definitely dive a little bit more into both of those large issues, obviously the climate crisis and police brutality, systemic racism. Gemma, why don't I turn to you? What brought you into this work?
That's a great question. I was, about 9 years ago, I had to use a wheelchair. I had multiple sclerosis since I was a young teenager. So the home care work is the home care workers and the whole I guess I would say, the pay system and what they do is completely, for lack of better words, unfair, unfit. And I saw a need, and I was in searching for home care workers, and I just happened to be connected with the right people at the right time. And I started volunteering, and once that happened, that was it. I just said, this is something that's got to change. It needs to be different, and we need to do this as soon as possible, like yesterday type situation. So it was just something that moved me, and being that I have home care workers, seeing the amount of work that they do, and to keep me alive and keep my life the way it is, I can't see any other way than to make sure they get the justice that they deserve.
Thank you. And of course, we'll talk more about that. Sheila, what brought you into this work?
Same question. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's really such an honor to be on this program with you all. I think it's really important to talk about, not only what brings people into these spaces, but why it's so important today. And I don't necessarily, I think my story is both political and personal, mainly because I'm old, but also I think because, this fight has been going on since literally the inception of this country. And for the first time, for me anyway, and I think for a lot of people, here is a movement that really endeavors to take us out of our silos, to join us together as a class of people who need change. We all need systemic change. The policy violences that we experience, as Gemma and the other young man were talking about, are critical, and they're impacting us every day. We don't understand why it's happening necessarily, but it is. And so I think for me and for many folks, being in a movement, in a campaign style that connects people who have not necessarily been connected in a long time, since probably after the Civil War, during the period of Reconstruction, and putting us together in a way that is building a powerful movement. Because in the words of Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a struggle. It never has and it never will. And so this is what draws me to the campaign, because as I said earlier, I'm older, but what are we going to bequeath to our future generations? And if I don't fight, and if we don't fight, what are we going to leave behind? Our whole planet is in peril. And all the people and the plants and everything on it are in peril, and it's our responsibility and it's our time. And we're in very challenging times, but it's also a time of the possibility of change. Real systemic change is possible. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you so much. And you mentioned, the personal is political. And so, Gemma, I wanted to go back to you for a second. You testified recently at I want to make sure I get this right, the Truth Commission on the Right to Health and the Third Reconstruction. We do a thing in the Poor People's Campaign, we have extremely long titles for things, and this is no exception. And so we have a clip that we want to play, and then I'll just get you to respond to it.
Big reason why it is so hard to find home care workers, is because home care workers only make $13.20 an hour in most parts of New York State, doing crucial work and incredibly important work, keeping people with disabilities and older adult New Yorkers out of nursing homes in our own, and being able to remain in our own homes and communities. The Fair Pay for Home Care campaign would address the home care workforce issue by making home care jobs living wage jobs in New York State.
So, having seen that clip, I'd love to ask, first, what was it like sharing your story and testifying at that Truth Commission?
It was amazing. I think when people don't know what's going on, people don't help. If they're not understanding the status quo of this healthcare crisis, they don't even feel the need to really do much. It's not necessarily a selfish thing, but telling a story and having people hear you and listen to you and understand, okay, that's what's happening. This is what's going on. That's an incredible experience, and that's an incredible way to educate individuals. And that's what we do at where I work at the New York County Majority. You know, we realize that by telling our stories and having people hear them and understand what's going on, you can move mountains. Otherwise, you know, people are just in the dark. So it was really important for me to get that across to everyone, why I am doing this and why I do what I do, and doing it today as we speak.
Yeah, and we're very appreciative. We're so grateful. You mentioned the living wage, and so I wanted to dig a little bit into asking you, what does a living wage mean to you? And if you could, if you don't mind, sharing a little bit more of your personal story, because I know you see up close every day the realities of what a living wage is, and importantly, what it isn't.
Sure, thank you. Oh goodness, a living wage is something that, for my opinion, and from obviously this Fair Pay for Home Care campaign, means you don't have to, live paycheck to paycheck. You can pay your bills on time. You don't have to work 5 jobs in order to feed your children or your family, or take care of the people that you love. That's the problem. I mean, we're seeing individuals who make $13.20 an hour in, I believe it's 50 counties or so in New York State. And that's insane. I don't even know how that's possible to be able to live and do the things you need to do. And we're talking about from your bills to doctor's appointments to food, all of that, just being able to live and not have a million jobs to be able to pay something that someone can do with one job. Now, not everybody, works a job where they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it doesn't take that much money to be able to live the life the way you need to. I have home care workers. I have multiple sclerosis and had it for a long time, but unfortunately, within the past, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 years, I've had to be in a wheelchair. And I can't tell you what I would do without my home care workers. I wouldn't be able to get out of bed. I wouldn't be able to get in the bed. I wouldn't be able to use the bathroom. I mean, all these things that people take for granted, and not because they don't, let me put it like this, take for granted because they never thought that, hey, maybe one day this can happen, whether you have a disability or you are an older adult. The fact is that 70% of us will need home care at some time in our lives, whether it's something happens, accident, whether it's an illness, or whether you're just aging and your body's just breaking down. So the living wage will allow people to, work and take care of others so that they can take care of their families, because it's a big cycle. And if they can't take care of their families, how can they take care of us? One of the other huge problems is that this industry is dominated 90% or 91% women, and about 77% are people of color, and 57% of them live on public assistance. So in terms of the living wage, there's no way that, this is gonna be, unless they get this raised Fair Pay for Home Care, which is 150% of the current minimum wage, there's not gonna be any way for them to do this. And honestly, I just feel like if this was a career that was dominated by white men, this conversation wouldn't even be happening. There wouldn't be an issue with the amount of money. They would just be paid as essential workers, what they are. But as a result of being women and people of color, they're not being paid the wages, and they're not being seen as essential workers. And, this is going back way far, but it's a really sad point. So we're fighting really hard to do this and get Fair Pay for Home Care into this year's budget. But I just can't help to think that we wouldn't even be having this problem if it wasn't women and people of color. So it's upsetting, but we're still fighting the good fight. Fair Pay for Home Care all day, every day. We have to get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Braden, I wanted to turn to you in terms of talking about, you mentioned the climate crisis, obviously a massive problem, almost impossible, sometimes overwhelming to grasp, and its effects on our generation, right? We're the ones who are going to be bearing the brunt of this, our kids. and we're seeing it already, and you've lived it. And so I'm wondering if you might be willing to talk a little bit about how you think through this massive, overwhelming existential problem, but address it in your work and through organizing.
Yeah, I'm really glad you used that word existential, because I was just ironically having a conversation maybe 2 days ago with an individual on why do young people, so far I'm 22, so kind of people in that bracket and younger, and actually even maybe a little bit older than myself, why we are seemingly, right? Okay, so I'm not going to put down the work that so many millions of people here and around the globe are doing, but seemingly reactionary as opposed to maybe seemingly proactive. And that was a really big point we were talking about. It's the existential threat of it all almost seems overwhelming, and I think that's a tool of our the oppressors to confuse us and disorient our work, and to make you feel like there is no answer, so you might as well just go ahead and do what you got to do, and that's not true. We could really start today to have a national and a global movement to confront the climate crisis, and I think you're right in that aspect as well, that it is not coming, it's here. We are experiencing it, and it's very important to also acknowledge that despite, or in regards as well with America being the richest country in the world, and with us having an abysmal amount of poverty, or any poverty is abysmal, but the level of poverty we have in this country, we still will not be facing and are not facing the full effects that are being felt around the globe. And so I think it's always important to remember when we discuss the climate crisis that this is it's genocide in reality. I mince those terms. It is racist. It is, and it goes everything within the campaign that we talked about, which is the 5 injustices: ecological devastation, militarism, the false moral narrative of Christian nationalism, poverty, and racism. These all are shown exponentially through the climate crisis. For example, in North Carolina, the individuals who are most likely to face longer periods of power outages, or receive less grants from FEMA, emergency funds, etc., are black and brown people, they are queer people, they're, all of these and poor people, they're poor people. And so we know that this is a fusion movement, and yeah, I don't know if that's how I just view it, that it is the most serious threat that this humanity's ever faced, at least. And it also encompasses all of these other things that we know that we're fighting about. Individuals with disabilities are less likely to be able to receive care, or maybe somebody can't get to work. In the case, maybe a home healthcare worker couldn't get to a place because of an ecological disaster, and so it exasperates everything.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think that gets to, Sheila, what you were talking about, how purposeful the Poor People's Campaign is about being a fusion movement, about addressing all of these injustices as interlocking injustices that exacerbate one another. So I'd love to get a sense from you, what is happening on the ground in Illinois as you organize as part of the Poor People's Campaign with some of these issues that we're hearing about, whether it's the climate crisis or healthcare injustice.
Yeah, so I think that, being on the coordinating committee, there, we have a pretty broad swath of work that we are responsible for, and, really trying to connect with people who are engaged in various fronts of struggle, and, really being able to identify those struggles as, the source of why we're struggling in the way that we're struggling, have a source. And that is how our country and our society is organized. And the sorts of policies that are put forth, where, for example, you have, our Congress voting for, to give $10 billion to Jeff Bezos, so that he can run his own space program. These are the kind of policy balances that we work on. So to get into the minutia, But when I say minutia, I'm just talking about what's specific here in Illinois. We've just been in a fight, in a long-term fight with a large polluter. It's a shredding company. People probably heard of it, General Iron. And so the community, actually the shredder was located in a community that was just kind of north of where I am. It's the northern part of the city that's often characterized as white and wealthy. Not necessarily the case when you look at the history, but that's how it gets characterized, because of course it means that we could somehow dismiss the people that live on the north side who were impacted by that company. The company moves south. In the southern part of the city, which is where you have Lake Michigan and the Calumet River, and it's zoned commercial. And you have all this industry that was from before, and now that the steel mills have closed down, you have this extraordinarily dirty industries that have, that are finding a home on the southeast side of Chicago. And so this shredder, General Iron, RMG, had requested a permit from the city of Chicago to operate. And so the community who had been fighting against petroleum coke, the Koch brothers has a plant that takes the byproduct from the tar sands production, and they make petroleum coke, and then they put it on barges and ship it down the Mississippi River, and it goes to other countries outside of the U.S. that they make like spandex and stuff out of. Anyway, but this KCBX was owned by the Koch brothers, so we fought the Koch brothers for about 3 years, and we won some pretty good policy about how it will be stored and transported. But the impacts of that petroleum coke and all the other, and the residue from the industrial period that still lingers in the community, has profound impacts on the health of folks, where we're seeing, babies coming home from the hospital, infants on nebulizers because they're already asthmatic, cancers and diseases that don't necessarily impact young people. And so let me get back to, because I'm kind of going all around the mulberry bush, but let me get back. So just coming off that fight and winning that, that significant victory, then we get notice that General Iron is going to relocate. Now, what's happening on the north side is that there was an agreement probably from back in the 60s. You know how these things are. They do urban planning. They do planning 20, 30 years in advance. So the Black Panthers, the Young Patriots, the Young Lords, they were fighting these plans back in the 60s. And when Lincoln Park, which is where General Iron was located, was predominantly Puerto Rican and extremely poor. But now, because of gentrification and all these things and the plans to take over this segment of the river, the plans to get rid of General Iron so that they could put a multi-million-dollar luxury condo, to really make the riverside look pretty. They can sell multi-million-dollar condos, put in these boutique shopping malls. So the agreement is that they're going to move down south because this is zoned commercial. And as it turns out, the southeast side is predominantly Black and brown. Again, forcing us into our siloed narratives, not understanding the source of why these changes are taking place. But nevertheless, we wage a fight because we are being impacted. And it is important to point out the fact that extraordinary profit gets made on racism. Let's not kid ourselves. So General Iron moves down. They're a shredder. They're hiring, so they always promise more jobs, but that's never the case, because the jobs that come in are typically temporary for the people who can take them. They're hiring out of hiring halls, and the people that are coming in are predominantly undocumented. They don't speak English. They're getting chopped up in some of this equipment. I mean, it's horrific how it operates. We're meeting with this company, trying to negotiate how they're going to operate. I was just like, I'm not meeting with these folks anymore, because it's, they're going to negotiate our death, how we're going to die. But anyway, we just waged a fight in the community, organizing the community, press events. We did everything. There was a hunger strike for 30 days where the mayor of the city of Chicago never once publicly acknowledged that people were literally starving themselves in her city to protest what was happening about this permitting. It was just horrendous.
And that is, so I'm so sorry to interrupt you on this. No, it's okay. I mean, there's just so much, right? It's overwhelming. It all intersects, and it is horrendous, and it leads to literal material death, right? It's like
No,
we're not messing around. It's not ideas. It really affects people in the worst possible way. And so unfortunately we are out of time. I would wish that I could talk to all three of you more, and I'm sure we'll have you back on. It has been really wonderful hearing just a little bit of each of your stories, and I'm sure for folks watching, feel free to get in contact with us and we can tell you more about everything that we're talking about here. But we do have to wrap it up. And so Sheila, Gemma, Braden, thank you so much. And thank you all for watching.
Thank you so much.
On Monday, April 11th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, we are gathering together in New York City for the New York leg of our mass Poor People's and Low-Wage Workers Assembly and Moral March on Washington and to the Polls Mobilization Tour.
El lunes 11 de abril a las 5 de la tarde, hora del este, nos reuniremos en la ciudad de Nueva York para la movilización de la región hacia nuestra asamblea masiva y marcha moral de los trabajadores pobres y de bajos ingresos en Washington, D.C. y hacia las urnas de votación.
Join us as we march on Wall Street, or tune in online at poorpeoplescampaign.org/livestream. For more information, visit poorpeoplescampaign.org.
Acompáñanos en el distrito financiero de Wall Street o conéctate en línea en el www.poorpeoplescampaign.org/livestream. Para más información visita www.poorpeoplescampaign.org.
Thanks so much for joining us for our second episode.
Gracias a todos nuestros magníficos invitados.
Thank you to the amazing group here at MNN.
Y gracias por sintonizar nuestro programa.
Join us in mobilizing New York City, New York State, and communities across the country to come together in Washington on June 18th.
Nos vemos en las calles. Forward together.
Not one step back.
Adelante juntos.
Ni un paso atrás.
Bye.
I worked 41 years in the coal mines. I have black lung, and it's just unfathomable what these poor coal miners have to go through in order to get what they have worked for and deserve.
At one time, poverty was a temporary condition. You were on a down slope for a minute, but you could bounce back up. We can't bounce back up today. It's permanent. We're not going back to the factory and building cars and trucks like we once did.
A job working at McDonald's or the grocery store doesn't pay enough for one person to live.
We work a 40-hour work week. Still not enough. Living from paycheck to paycheck. Rent is $600 a month. We got water bill, electricity. I do this for my kids. And it hurts.
I'm 46 years old. I've lived in poverty here in West Virginia every day of my life. And I'm working. I am working poor with a bachelor's degree. I'm doing the best I can with what I have.
We were in the height of mass water shutoffs. This entire neighborhood was shut off all at one time.
I saw all my neighbors get shut off right in front of me. It was kind of terrifying.
I'm 42 years old and I'm a cashier at McDonald's. I had lost my house. You're welcome to come inside. There's a lot of people that are living in their cars. You never notice until you're in the same situation.
I don't have stuff to give my children. I'm paying all these bills and they need school clothes and stuff. And they be asking me for, I can't give it to them.
Now I'm a Kansas farmer's wife. Kansas farmers are committing suicide. Why? They're usually in debt up to their eyeballs.
I see poverty in my own community. You know, there's a 70% unemployment rate in the reservation right now.
Here in New York City, we're home to millionaires and billionaires, and we have so many people living in the street, and that's just not right.
I've been a homeless veteran twice, lived in a shelter.
I've been living down here since I was 17.
My only chance of going to college was joining the Army.
We are demanding
that we stop the war on our poor.
700,000 people in this country are on the verge of losing their food stamps.
This budget calls for shrinking the social safety net programs like Medicare.
I just know that everything that's happening to us isn't right.
I'm in stage 5 of kidney disease. I fell behind on my health care and they canceled my health insurance and they told me I have to wait until open enrollment. There's only 5 stages of kidney disease and I'm in the 5th stage. Murder, it's murder. You know, if you ask me, it's murder.
I lost a son to gun violence. And I lost a daughter.
No parent should have, in America, should have to bury their child for lack of medical space. I'm wailing because my children
My God.
are no more.
My God. My God, Kevin.
Well, I'm wailing, y'all. Wailing. Because my babies ain't no more. How many more babies? How many more children?
No more.
I want you to know that when hands that once picked cotton join hands of Latinos, join hands of progressive whites, join faith hands and labor hands and Asian hands and Native American hands and poor hands and wealthy hands with a conscience and gay hands and straight hands and trans hands and Christian hands and Jewish hands and Muslim hands and Hindu hands and Buddhist hands. When we all get together, we are an instrument of redemption. When we join hands, we can revive and make sure that the promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and equal protection under the law is never taken away from anybody. So I got a question. Are the rejected ready to revive and declare that this land is your land, this land is my land, this land is our land, and together from the State House to the White House, the rejected are going to demand that this nation never give up on being one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.